Welcome to What Have You, featuring Rachel Jankovic and Rebecca Merkel. This audio is brought to you by Canon Press. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure you knew that a featured guest of What Have You, Nancy Wilson, has a new podcast called Femina. Every Friday, Nancy shares a quick, Bible-saturated devotional that covers all matters of the Christian life. You can find the Femina podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to What Have You. I'm Rachel Jankovic.
I'm Becca Merkel.
Here we are, gathering ourselves together again on a very windy day on top of my hill.
It is.
We switched to our winter winds, I think, because all through the summer it never sounded like raccoons were moving into our stovepipe, but it's doing that again.
Well, I kept thinking that something was scrabbling around in the classroom ceiling today. And I was like, whoa, what is it? And it was just the wind blowing across the roof in a weird way. But I just kept looking up there like,
something bad is happening. Yeah, that's funny.
Speaking of something bad happening, my car's making a weird noise.
Yeah, if you notice that.
Deep rumble.
You guys, I think in our last episode,
In our last episode,
I know. I think I told you all about my shortcomings of mascara. How I'd lost it.
Yeah, you did.
But in that time, so I ordered a double decker of my mascara I like.
Okay.
It came.
Okay.
I found my original mascara
job.
in the unlikely location of, get this, my cosmetic bag. I think I mentally blocked the fact that we had gone somewhere and I had packed my makeup. So I never looked in there. Anyways, I found it. And a listener mailed us mascara out of the kindness of her heart. So I went from -1 to +4.
Oh,
I'm feeling like, man, if only
really
mascara
good.
was the rest of my life, I'd be really on top of things
totally.
now.
That's amazing.
But
I feel like we should also reassure everyone that the reason we are tardy on the recording here is not because we've been arrested.
no, but you never know anymore in our town.
wondered.
You think at any given time you could get arrested for
Like,
any
where
given
are they?
activity.
Are they on the lam?
We had another something that we sing whilst the people who know like us blasted absolutely obscene music. It was Cardi B's
latest gem.
Blasting it over our heads. And it was actually that was really
you know what? Okay,
interesting and also
horrifying. Beautiful.
Interesting because it's not the religious people versus the non-religious people.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been reading right now for stuff that I've been reading. Anyways, I keep hitting on these assorted historical details like the cult of fertility or really just grotesque yakadoo stuff people were all off doing at assorted times. And I thought, isn't it interesting that for us it's not a cult of fertility, it's just a cult of fornication and abortion.
Barren fornication.
But this is like, I think that Cardi B is like if you took the worst of all the gross rapey rappers and then you instead had it a woman instead but the fact that it is religious is the part that was interesting to me. It's not non-religion, it's practicing a religion, it's idolatry. Anyways, that's what we did
to something though, and that is the reason that when people said, oh, it's that song by Cardi B, the reason I knew of it was because of the great dust that there had been lately because of how vile the song is and the fact that it soared up to #1 or whatever it was.
Never was like, vile song, that's us.
But here's the other thing, and this is one of the things that it made me realize. Okay, so the reason I knew about it was not because of all of my Facebook friends who love Cardi B, but there was a lot of breathless upset regarding how vile the lyrics were. Now, my thought was, okay, so I'm not going to go Google and read them because
right, no.
I mean, I gleaned enough from the outrage to know what the name is, and that was enough for me. I didn't need to go further.
I don't know, Beck, do you think you don't need to make, like, shirts that say, I object to specifically this line in Cardi B's
the thing. There
new
are
masterwork of debauchery?
Christians
I know.
who plunge around in there, getting more and more angry about it, and posting more and more times about it. And
this
feel like...
reminds me of Christians being in a constant sweat about the sex ed classes.
Yeah, but the thing is there is, of course, if it's number one in the nation, it is it's a real and present danger. I get that part. But the other thing is there's a good bit of fuel to the fire that I think we could maybe just stop adding.
Well, sometimes I tell my kids, like, don't be the outrage. Like, don't make it easy for people to get a big reaction from
But also, it's not healthy for you to go read vile stuff and get mad, and then go read it some more and get mad, and then go read it some more.
That's actually how I feel about unless it's something right here that you have a specific obligation to in some way. I don't need bulletins about what the drag queens at the libraries are doing. And I don't. And the reason is because I'm not taking my children to the library to have the drag queen read to them. So it is like that's what I meant about the sex ed things, is like, have your outrage have some backbone so that your outrage actually removes you from the situation. Like, if you think you're going to listen to top 40 music and not find something objectionable, what planet have you been living on? And also, why, of course, sex ed is an Evel Knievel situation. So why are you in the school?
Don't put your kids there.
Maybe spend your energy constructively instead of destructively.
Yeah, and I just think the Cardi B thing struck me as it is shameful to even speak of those things which are done by them in secret. And I'm like, what we didn't need is a lot of Christians running around spreading the big news for Cardi B on what she was saying, because I'm like, what if we were to just go ahead and not speak of those things which are done by them in secret, or
it's not so really secret since it's number one. Well, I didn't know until later that that's what the song was, and honestly, I think maybe you can hear what she's saying in that song, but there was so much, they were blasting it at such a magnitude that you couldn't actually. It was. But
there was enough.
Shadrach you could hear an occasional word that you were like, Shadrach was standing there with his eyes rather large, looking around, and I was like, yep, sing loud, man, this is warfare. It's just, it was, that's funny.
Anyway.
So before we had Jemima on the podcast, we left an episode hanging with the promises of following up on it.
Did we?
I think that was the Spank the Future podcast.
Yeah, I need to, before you go there, because we need to, because we did promise that. I just need to tell you that I got my big garbage can and my garbage bags that we spoke of a while ago. And I did get asked this when I was at the conference in South Dakota lately, like, how did the garbage bags turn out? And I hadn't ordered them yet, so that was...
You're like, don't check up on me.
I'm just saying, I'm here to report that the garbage can is great. It's big and square, and it turns out that holds a lot more than a round one. Weirdly.
Not weirdly.
Well, it does.
Basic geometry.
Without taking up more space in your kitchen.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Basic geometry there, Beck.
Fine, Rach.
Yeah.
Fine. Why don't you have a square one then?
Because I have a wine barrel.
And, the bags are promising really well. So I'm feeling really good about it.
Maybe you should get me that for my birthday.
For your birthday?
Yeah.
I'll think through it. Anyway, that's it. Now,
some experimental garbage bags sound like they're just up my alley.
I know. Now we can circle back and talk about Spanking the Future.
I don't remember why we got onto that though. But
hard to say.
So this is sort of just related to it. We probably should have re-listened to the last moments of that one so we knew what we were talking about. But related to that is something that I've been thinking about a lot, which we grew up with the concept of fellowship, which is something that really is a word we use a lot. And it's a word that, like, grandpa and grandma used a lot. So dad grew up with it. Like this is a place where I think we have a weird legacy, an unusual legacy in this particular area. And I was just being struck recently by this, that I was like, I think if there are a lot of Christians that we lose when we talk about that, because they do not have any bearings. Like, they don't know what is it that we're talking about anyways. You know, like, so when you say you need to get back in fellowship, they're like, but what's the fellowship? And if you're like, that broke fellowship, they're like, but what's the fellowship? And, like, we talk like that. And it struck me the other day how there is a desperate need for Christians to learn that, like, by intuition, like the sight, the smell, the flavor of of Christian fellowship. Yeah. Because if you've never... like, put a pin in that, in your, like, and been like, this is what we're talking about.
Right.
And what prompted that for me, and I thought maybe we should talk some about this, is I was just listening to a baby, some little baby, not a big baby, being clearly bad.
Okay.
Like, the clearly an evildoer.
Yeah.
And the mom trying to pacify it with snacks, but like, if you're holding a little fat baby who's arching their back at you or being clearly giving you the death stare at something, that's not something that you're gonna fix with a Cheerio.
No.
Like, and that reality, it's not that we didn't, like, it just is that there are some things, if your baby's making noise because they're communicating with you that they feel unpleasantly or they need something, that's very different than the angry, rude face or the...
Sure. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I do.
And I was just thinking about it, how paying attention to that is really important even when they're little, because you're not trying to pacify or distract them out of sin. You're trying to... like, which in my experience, that's what I usually see parents doing, is where there's an obvious sin and they're like trying to soothe them. They're like patting their back or like
change the subject.
Do you want a drink? Yeah, like, oh, what's wrong? Where you think, oh, it's the human heart. It's what ails us all is what's wrong right there.
Yeah.
And not because you're like gonna whiz into discipline. It's because you want to draw the clear line, even with a baby, that that's not what we're doing.
No, we're not doing that.
Right. And so I was thinking, like, the difference between that does continue, like the two paths that you can take when they're very little, does just continue to grow and grow and grow. Because, you know, when you're like, had a kid who's being a crank, and maybe you're being a crank, and maybe there's some sin in the atmospheres of the house,
right? And
they wake up from their nap or whatever, and they're fussing, and you walk in and you're like, oh, and you have a dirty diaper. You know, like, that is not fellowship. That's the ambiance of not walking in the light.
I think that, like, even if you're to take a little kid out of it, because that can be slightly more obtuse, maybe, if you're talking about a little baby. But just think of a husband and wife. Is your home marked by kindness and cheerfulness and getting along, or are there lots of little digs and little cracks about things and bringing up grievances and reminding him of the time last week that you said this and he said that he wouldn't, and then look at this is exactly what I said would happen.
Here we go again.
Yeah. And so it's like, what is the flavor of the home just when it's like at rest? If you were to take a sampling of your home, the feel, the vibe, the sounds and sights and smells of your home, is it everybody loves each other, or are people, you know, the thing where kids will, I don't know, like, they'll passive aggressively dig their elbow into their seatmate in the back seat and act like it was just I was just turning around. I just needed to turn around, but I did it by jabbing my elbow into your ribs.
The Boston block, which is where you are careful to use your whole body to fill up a door that someone else is trying to come through, and you... Yeah, that mood.
But is that what your home is like, metaphorically, all the time? Are you looking for any chance to dig the elbow?
Right.
Or is it actually, when something like that happens, is it a noticeable enough rift that you have to stop and get it fixed before moving on?
Exactly. Well, that's the reason I was talking about the babies, because I actually think that there are many well-intentioned parents who, through not recognizing it, are actually building a culture where someone being angry or sullen or slamming a door or being ugly at somebody else is seen as nothing, right?
Yes.
Like where if your teenage daughter came in and slams the door or gives you a big snork in some way, that you might be like, oh, honey, do you need some Advil?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. But that starts when they're really little and you don't recognize the difference between a physical ailment and a spiritual ailment.
But I just mean that, like, if you're not sure how to tell with the baby, it's like, well, sure, but just baseline, you know how to tell when it's, adults.
Well, I was going to say, when it was a baby. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you don't want to, like, I'm just saying, have your bearings right. What does it mean to be in fellowship? We all understand
totally.
it. So when a baby is freaking out in an angry fashion, you can tell.
And I want to be clear that we're not talking about a baby who's teething or something that's miserable. And the other thing is that it's something that with a baby, you just are not, you get more of what you subsidize and you get less of what you penalize. And the thing is with a baby, if they scream at you and you say, no, use your cheerful voice. Let's talk cheerful. But the really important thing is that by holding
you're
that
not
standard,
talking like a 6-week-old baby right now.
No, I'm talking about the kind of baby that might take the bite you gave them out of their mouth and throw it on the floor and give you a look of judgment
and rage.
Yeah. And my point there is actually this is not a point about discipline, it's a point about standards.
Yes.
Like the point is that the standard, and if you're holding your baby to a cheerful, you're going to be a cheerful kid, kind of a standard. Yeah. You're holding yourself to that, which means that it's off the options for you to huffily go get a child out of their crib, to carry them like a sack of potatoes out to the living room where you sigh heavily and set them down and like, well, at least you didn't nap today. These are not the options that are on the table. And I think that it just is if you're just starting out with little kids, you'll feel like this is an endless journey of, this is so hard to be always let's talk cheerfully. And if you grab mama's legs, you can't whine. You have to say, oh, please, mama. Or, and you're constantly trying to correct the tone of voice, and you're constantly trying to be try it again. And that's good. This is why you sleep so hard at night. This is why. It's really hard work.
I was just in the airport with Ben, and there was an amazing vignette taking place in front of us. And it was this little girl who was just barely walking, so one or something, blood curdling shriek rage happening, and it was because she wanted to be walking one direction while her mother was trying to make her walk a different direction. And any time her will was crossed whatsoever, she went off into the entire terminal knows about it. It was full shriek. And as soon as a mother would give in and let her go where she wanted, big beaming smile, running around. It was like an on-off switch where it was so clear that this is a little girl who's figured out already
how to do it.
Exactly how to get her way, and it's working. And that's the thing we're talking about, is don't set that in concrete.
Don't let that be the way that it is, because the reality is that is a way to make it not a blessing to have children in your house, because what's happening is you are making them live in a way that is not glorifying God. You're making them displease God by dishonoring you, dishonoring what you said, not You know, like, it's
And
just
here's the thing,
also no fun and kids.
No.
And I just want to say this because toddlers are hilarious and so much fun.
Yeah.
And there is zero reason to make that a miserable phase of life. Like, sure, it's busy, but it is in no way the tragedy people make it. But if you have a little hellion, it will be a big time for you.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is I do think a lot of well-meaning parents who, they want that for their kid. They want their child to not be that way. But they go about it in the least effective manner possible in trying to dissuade the little wee person from doing that. So, like, here's my metaphor. Years ago, when we were staying in Oxford for just a summer, we were in this flat, and once a week, this lawn care company would come to mow the lawn, and I would get positively beside myself watching these guys mow the lawn, because it was a big square, but just that's it, a big square. I think an 8-year-old with one of those old-fashioned blade twirling ones could have gotten it done in an hour. You know? No, okay, hour and a half. It was a big lawn, but it was like square. That's it. And it was 2 men with a pickup, with a ramp down the back, with a riding lawnmower, with everything. So they would make a day of it every single week. And they first got out weed eaters, and they would weed eat the entire surface of that lawn for any stray longer weed that they might find. So it was like they would just comb the surface for a dandelion that was too tall. Then, after such time, they got out the riding lawnmower. I was like, you guys, what are you doing? Then he would zoom around on that lawnmower in no kind of order. Like, it was not straight lines. He would just loop doodle around and reverse and go back and forth and around the tree and then over here and there. And then, of course, it would take him forever to go back and get all the little bits he missed. And then, after that, the 2 of them would get out rakes. Because they did not bag it as they went. And then they would rake the whole surface of the lawn, and then they would load it up by hand into the back of the truck and drive away after many, many hours.
That's like what happens if you're getting paid by the hour right there.
I know.
It's not what happens if you're trying to do a good job.
No, but every
value
week,
for time is not the priority.
Every week, and I would stand there at the window going like, I don't consider myself an efficiency freak, but it turns out
this is doing it to me.
That I am. But what I'm saying is, I feel like there are parents who might be like well-intentioned. They want their children to be good. And so when their little tot is having a freak out, they begin to go down the path of, here comes the weed eater first, and then
did anyone bring the ramp?
So,
like it's not something that they're just doing in the normal course of business.
No, where it's just like, hey, take care of it, keep on going, we're going to move on, rather than...
Well, I remember somebody asking me, like, how did I train Blair to not get into the kitchen garbage when she was in her walker? And I think we just had a moment of silence, and I was like, I guess I just put the garbage on top of the washing machine when she's in her walker. Because I'm like, I just haven't felt like there was any reason for me to stand guard over the garbage and busy myself with little hand flicks and things.
Yeah.
But, and this is, I think that these things are hard to, so for us, it was not usually that kind of thing that we were dealing with all the time. But if a little person in a walker had arched their back or screamed at someone or been angry, then that would have been like, you stop making dinner to handle this and to cope with this.
But sometimes there's just no's. You can't touch the outlet.
Yeah, but sometimes they do that.
Whatever.
So, but even then, I feel like it was all pretty smooth and easy unless it was defiant. Like, unless something happens that is defiant, then you're like,
I think
okay.
what I'm talking about, though, with the long, drawn-out drama is the person who's like, as soon as I see disobedience in my child, we begin the 19-step questionnaire that I work through asking them, is this how you want to be? And then you sit down and then you talk to them about,
are you being idolatrous?
Shall you pick? No, it's more like trying to talk them through it and ease them out of their moods and reason with them. And
when I first was having,
I mean?
This is just interesting because I'm old enough now that when I was first having kids in the Christian world of parenting, there was way more crazy legalism than now. And what there was at that time was this stuff with, like, you need to blanket train your babies and you need to not let them get out of their crib until they have picked up their toys that are in their crib, and you need to have them have 30 minutes of silence alone in their playpen sometimes. And you need to, and all of this was like to make well-mannered, obedient children. Like, that was the goal. Well, the goal is a great goal. But I thought that method was far more likely to raise up a battalion of haters than anything else. Like, it just seemed really tragic. But in my lifetime of parenting, the pendulum has swung so hard and so far the other way that you have Christians being like when, what was that, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever, it would have been where you'd be saying, I think it's out of line to be flicking your child's hand for wanting to crawl off of the blanket, or, I'd be like, I think you're being unkind. And now it's the whole direction of, like, show some kindness by showing these kids a boundary. Like, love this child enough to tell them no. That's what we were talking about, the cookie dough eater. That's what brought this on. I was realizing that video to me was as unfunny as, like, a video of a really obese child eating ice cream would be, like, where you're like, it's not funny to make fun of their fat, like, to laugh at their fatness when you're making them fat.
No,
is not nice.
Good. And I just think there's a lot of people who are making their own lives far more difficult than they need to make them, by trying to do, I don't know, lots of conversational workarounds to just making the child stop doing what they're doing. Like, it's just, there's a whole lot of shenanigans that you could just go ahead and say, actually, we're not going to do that. And I'm not going to give you a big Socratic dialogue about it.
About why we're not going to do it?
Or just about, like, kids are, in one way, yes, they're abstract thinkers. But in another way, you just need the real clear boundaries of, this is not okay, you may not do it.
I had a really hilarious thing happen. I was setting up my shafts for my loom the other day on Sunday, and I had put a bunch of heddles, the string heddles, on 8 shafts, and then when I got to pick them up, I couldn't find the pins that you put through the edges of it, so I used knitting needles, but I wasn't thinking too clearly about it, so when I picked them up, some of them shot off the knitting needles and out of the heddle, so it just was like, oh, well, that was dumb, it was whatever. Okay. So as I go to fix the problem, I say to myself, oh, how did that happen? And then I hear Moses all the way down the hall somewhere. He says, hey, Mom. I was like, what? And he said, God is actually in charge of everything. And I said, yeah, that's right. Not realizing this was connected at all. And he's like, so he did it. Because I was like, how could this happen? Moses is like, it is the will of the Father.
Predestination,
Father. But
Romans 9.
I know. It just got me so tickled that he was like, hey, Mom, God's in charge. Catching me in my faulty theology around my loom.
But you know what I mean about, like, yes, They do get into some philosophical topics when they're young, but
they do not need
concrete.
No,
just
so much easier. And that was a thing that we always did with our kids was like, there was a parent telling me like, I just don't know what to say because if I say, if you get out of your bed, then you'll be in trouble. But then if I don't see them get out of their bed and then they think that they'll get away with it. And I was like, see, we just said, if I see your head not on your pillow, then you'll get a spanking.
You're bringing back to me floods of memories of where we would stand
peeking in the crack of the door. And your kid is like, how are they so omniscient? Because you shut the door and they hop out of bed and you open the door and they look at you like, oh, how did you know? You were not in here a moment ago. But Luke and I also spent time whenever I can remember having kids who were super emotional, like when they desperately needed to sleep, but they had passed some frontier where they could no longer calm themselves down enough to do it. Okay. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
Maybe they're actually have already gotten too old for naps, but they real bad need a nap.
Yeah.
Right in that moment. Whatever. Many a time did we be like, there are 2 rules. Your head will stay on your pillow and you will not cry. Those are the 2 rules. And I'm going to sit here and not talk to you and watch you. Like, watch you or read to make sure that your head stays on your pillow and that you don't cry. And that's just some parenting hours that you want to put in. And when you have put them in, it shows. It's a much more fun time.
I remember, I don't remember who it was, but they came home from preschool. And their mom was like, what did you learn at preschool today? And it was like, we learned how to stand in line. We were laughing about how much of a life skill that is.
Yeah.
And it's like blessings on those preschool teachers who put the time in that teach people how to stand in line. But there's a lot of parenting young kids where it's like what we did today was we learned how to stay in bed when it's time for a nap. Or at least we got a preliminary skirmish out of the way. This might be a month-long ordeal, but
it might be every day at nap time. This is what we're doing, but it is so worth the effort of having a child who knows how to just do the thing.
And I'll tell you what to not do, and that is to give up 3 weeks into it, thereby guaranteeing that your child knows that if he sticks with anything for 3 weeks,
you have to show no weakness on some of these things.
What you want is for them to know that for 3 long weeks, you will stick with it until they just learn that they're going to have to obey on the first time. And then what you'll find out is that you get first-time obedience.
It does not take 3 weeks every
single
time to do this. You just have to be willing to... You have to always be willing to be more stubborn than your child
But the thing is like, let's say that you're a counter. You're a big counter. Like, I'm going to count till 10...
17.
To 9.
When I get to 17.
9 and a half.
Well, but when you get to 16 and 3/4 is when they'll obey. And you can just as easily make them obey without numbers.
Yes. If they can learn how to behave at 9 7/8, then you know that they could have done it when you told them the first time to do it.
And the thing that's interesting is that by sneaking up that deadline, by moving it up, you actually teach them. Like, people ask me all the time because of that one quote that's out there on the internet about be the kind of woman who can say to her emotions, shut up and salute Jesus. They ask me all the time, how do you even learn that? What we're dealing with now is a generation of people who were not taught themselves how to control themselves. And they're really bad at teaching the next generation how to control themselves because they don't know. But this is how. When you see your kid having to compose themselves for obedience because it matters to them that they do so right now, you are seeing someone who is learning their own self-control. They're learning how to do this. And the other thing about that is that it is so much more loving to teach them that than to teach them to run out to the, like, they learn how to quickly obey. They're learning how to do that, not just towards you. They're learning how their relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
Like when I know I have to do something.
Also, now that you mention that quote, be the kind of woman who can tell her emotions to shut up and salute Jesus. I was struck in the sermon yesterday. Dad was preaching. He was talking about in the garden where Jesus was asking if there is any other way, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but your will be done. And he was talking about how Jesus didn't want to go. His emotions didn't want to go. And yet he was obedient. And I was thinking, isn't that interesting that even Jesus had this? When you say you need to be able to tell your emotions no and salute Jesus, this is actually something Jesus showed
Himself.
us how to do it.
That's what... Didn't we talk about this on the podcast? That's why I just paused all of a sudden.
Probably, but
Wasn't it Luke commenting that what Jesus did on the cross was not... It wasn't the obedience of not mouthing off at someone. It was the actively doing something that you didn't want to do.
But also... Jesus himself having to set aside his emotions in order to obey. And so it actually is incredibly Christ-like when we are able to do it.
Yes.
So to act as if, and many people will come running in to say you're teaching your children to be wildly suppressed and,
I just have to say, no, you should meet our children because it's a raucous, fun time. Like they really are not.
No,
we are not trying to train up children who are huge duds.
It is actually possible to create a lot of repressed, angry, ingrown toenails of humans, because it really is.
It's not just possible, and it's easy.
Commonly
it's
done.
the other side of the It's the other side of the total indulgence is just not walking with the Spirit. It's not walking faithfully in all of the difficulties. Is you can either just live by kind of carnal like legalities, kind of like we'll just make them conform until they get old enough to not owe us this obligation. And then, of course, they don't want to be by us. They have no love. They have no loyalty. They have no desire to be around you because what kind of fun have you ever been?
And they probably will have all kinds of strange neuroses that you manage to pack in there.
Yeah.
Because what we're talking about is not a heavy-handed, angry, obey me right now, you dreaded little peasant.
No, because that's the part of it that, that going back to the woman who can tell her emotions to shut up and salute Jesus is the only person who's actually equipped to teach it to their child. When you yourself control yourself that way, you have reason to teach your child, and they just know that you are qualified to do this because you actually are.
But if you're an angry, overbearing, critical, short-tempered, short-fused kind of a parent, that actually is wildly self-indulgent.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
That is a parent.
I think I said this in one of my books, but frequently the parents who make life just a monster time for everybody are the ones who think that they always think they need to be tightening the rules because they're making so many rules that their kids can't possibly be living in compliance with all of them. You know, like if you're getting in trouble for leaving a drip on the bathroom counter beside the sink, then if it's this outrages us as much as it outrages me that you left a sock on the floor of your room, and I'm outraged about where everything is something, then those are the parents who often end up thinking that their kids are total hellions because they've made so many rules that nobody could easily live in obedience.
Right.
Here.
But I just mean that if you're a self-indulgent parent like that, in the name of righteous parenting, strict, righteous, high standard parenting. If what you're actually doing is being self-indulgent, then what you will be creating in your children is its own brand of self-indulgence.
Totally.
So it's just really important that when you're disciplining, when you're making rules, that you're not doing it because it's your own little pet
Right. And coming back to
things.
fellowship, it's that if we walk in the light as he is in the light, then we have fellowship with one another. Like, and that's the thing. When you're disciplining or when you're teaching your kids something, it should always be the action of going, basically grabbing their hand to say, no, this is the more beautiful way.
Yeah.
This is the more happy way. This is the more holy, joyful, vibrant life. Like every time you're pulling them, and that's the thing, is that it's not pulling them into compliance or into brainless submission. It's pulling them into fellowship with a loving God and people who love him. It's not so even if that action, even if discipline is required to go get that child, like to get them to come with you, it's not about trying to get them into a state of brokenness or confinement. It's trying to get
payback?
them. No, it's trying to get them into a state of freedom and getting to live freely together in fellowship and joy is a million times better. So like that idea that you're just trying to get them, like discipline is not to try to get your kids into their kennels.
No.
Like discipline is all about the freedom to walk with God all over the place.
And if the goal of the discipline should always be to restore fellowship as quickly as possible, it's not about paying them off because of whatever
Or wanting it to linger.
you have to settle.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, if you imagine if your little toddler fell down in a mud puddle, your instinct is to get them cleaned up as quickly as possible. Here, like, come over here, let's take this off, let's get you washed up, let's get you in a clean outfit, and now isn't that all better? That's what discipline should be like. It should not be like, well, let's see how you like that mud.
That's kind
Just
of like
sit there in that mud.
Like the
Does
trying
that
to
teach you how much you don't like to be in the mud?
tying the chicken the dog killed around the dog's neck, like making that's a folk remedy.
Yeah.
That's not something you should ever be doing, that style of work with your children.
No.
It's not, the whole point is that
Right.
they need to know about cleanliness and happiness, not sin and destruction.
The thing that broke the fellowship was their sin. And so you are using discipline to bring them back and restore that fellowship as quickly as possible. And if you have long periods of punishment and just let that sink in, why don't you? And now why don't you go sit in your room all afternoon?
Have you managed to feel appropriately bad yet?
Yeah, and if you make them sit in their room all afternoon, then basically what you're doing is letting them sit and stew and get more and more put out with you.
I want to bring this up, though, because it's relevant. And I think I've also written about this, but I don't expect you all to have read everything I've ever written. So
Rachel.
I'm just like, everyone's going to be like, she's just a one-no wonder.
She's
I
going
already
to give
read
us
this.
a quiz on her own works.
Exactly. Well, I feel like here I am being repetitive. That's what it feels like. But when people say I'm going to give them grace, it is not grace unless it is getting them out of the sin.
Yeah.
So if by grace you mean I'm not disciplining right now because there is another method of restoring them to fellowship, then use whatever tools the Lord gave us. Like, by all means, like, that's great. But it is not grace to ignore sin. And that's what people almost always mean it by. They're like, I'm just parenting with a lot of grace.
Yeah.
Which is why my child is not acting at all like someone who lives in grace. Like that, like what is grace? Like, grace is something that restores us to God. It's not something that leaves us in our problems.
Yeah.
I'm just like, don't lie to yourself and say that you're giving your kids grace when you're
giving
not
them
getting
grace
them. You're not
would
doing
be
anything.
What you're doing when you cheerfully listen to their rendition of their dream for the 16th time.
Oh, I like
You
somebody
know?
said, but because the Bible reading challenge, that's an interesting thing, is that there are Bible reading plans that call it grace. Like, a grace day is the day you don't have to read, which is so funny because you're like, when you're talking about should I read my Bible or not, and you decide to not, and you call it giving yourself grace, that's really funny. Where is your storehouse of grace?
It's like having a cheat day on your diet, but you name it Diligent Day.
Exactly. Exactly. This is the day I'm going to pork out on donuts, but I'm going to call it Health First Day. This is the day when I've planned. Yeah, it's like, this is the day for Anyway, that just makes me laugh. But I think just that's a good thing to think about. Like, do you think you're giving your kids grace when what you're doing is actually indulging yourself in not? Because every time I've actually heard someone use the word just being gracious right now,
what it is, I don't want to get up off the couch.
It does not look like grace. It looks more like lazy. It looks more like because I don't feel like it.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
Because when you don't want to get up and go deal with the problem, it's easier to just overlook it.
I have to say, one of probably the most fun things for me is having my kids all being old enough that their own takes on child discipline tickles me very hard, because sometimes they'll just be like, you know what? They just shouldn't have let their kid do that, because they really see it as like they're closer to their own childhood, but they see it as a tremendous mercy that they were not left to themselves, which means that they very joyfully and cheerfully talk about the times what they tried to do a bad thing. And they also love sort of street analysis of what, like, it's interesting how that, I don't know, I've just really enjoyed that, where they're like, well, I had this toddler with me and I was talking to them and I was like, I don't know why their parents are letting them be like that, because I felt like they'd be a lot happier if you didn't let them, you know. It's just,
we had, I'm sure I've said this before, but we did have one weird infraction that we just called weirdness. It was like, you can't do weirdness. I don't know how it came to be that, but it was be like strange forced silliness or weird voices, and we'd just be like, don't do weirdness. You can't be doing that, so we just didn't tolerate it. But really cracked me up when they started getting old enough to encounter people whose parents had not weeded out the weirdness, and they would just be like, I'm so glad that you didn't let us go there. Somebody who in 8th grade still can only speak with a Batman voice all the time, or something. Yes. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you would never let us do that. Where they start seeing that, I remember, it felt like it'd be cool if I spoke with a Batman voice all the time. But
there was that time that I decided I was going to. Mom just put the kibosh on that in a short amount of time. But they have enough, they were old enough to remember it and old enough to look back in gratitude that you were just like, that we were just laughing about one of those the other night, which was Lena's commitment to low ponytails. There was some time when she was like, I should have a low ponytail, and I was like, I said, I want you to have a ponytail that looks like it's smiling, not one that's looking too sober. And we had this whole discussion, and this was years ago now, know, and we were laughing about that. We won't wear a founding father ponytail. We're going to put a more cheerful one. Well, right now, all of my girls wear their ponytails right on top of their heads, like with scarves, and they have a ponytail launch, going on, and which is funny because that's just what they have gotten into doing. It's what they do. But it makes me laugh because I was like, remember when you were really into the founding fathers look? They're laughing about, I don't know why, or not wanting anything feminine. Not wanting to have any jewelry on, or not wanting whatever.
To try.
Not wanting, and all of those things, it was just like, I can remember explaining to them, like, in life, like, it's okay to not prefer some things, but there are some doors that I will not let you close. Like, you don't have, and I've done that with someone saying, I'm not a knitter. I was like, you're too young to make statements like that. I don't care if you don't love knitting, and I don't care if you never really take off with knitting, but I care that you not start shutting and locking doors in your life about who you are. Or I'm not the kind who will wear jewelry. And you're like, nope, that's not one of your options. You're going to leave that door open. You might.
Totally.
Anyways, there's our random all about the town.
Indeed. Well,
we have to go pick up kids from school, so
indeed we do.
The crisis has come upon us.
And then we have to go to a football game.
Tips. I have a tip.
Oh, what?
Weird tip.
Huh?
I've tried hairnets in my bannetons, the bread bannetons, and they totally are non-stick. You can put
What are you talking about? A hairnet?
Like it's like a
Why do you need a hairnet?
disposable because I make sourdough. Sometimes if it lingers for a while, like sometimes if I have bread going and I put it in the fridge or whatever, I do a high hydration. So even if you put a lot of rice flour in the Banneton, really they didn't usually stick, but sometimes it would rise more and get stuck around the edge, and then you have more of a misshapen loaf.
Yeah.
The hairnets are actually, it's like a disposable hairnet, but you can use it a number of times. It's not like fishnet. It's like really thin.
Like tulle, kind of?
No, it looks more like interfacing or something, like a really thin kind of, I don't know. But either way, it has elastic around the edge. You can put it in the basket. It's like a non-stick surface for sticky bread. So when you dump it out, it just comes out totally clean from the basket.
Where do you put the hairnet?
In the Banneton.
Before the dough? Mm-hmm. And then you dump it out and peel the hairnet off of it?
No, the hairnet stays with the basket because it has elastic around the edge. So you dump it off and the hairnet comes off.
Interesting.
It just is actually a thing that has made me use less of the rice flour, which means less of that flour buildup in your Bannetons, which you do have to knock out at some point.
So I have a weird random tip. We've done this the last couple of weeks for Sunday lunch. That is from Mimi Thorison's cookbook, but it is surprisingly delicious. But it's sage leaves from the garden. Do you have any sage growing about?
Does it look like I have sage?
I don't know. Maybe. Anyhow, you get sage leaves, Rach.
Mm-hmm.
You make a batter that's like a beer batter. Just some flour and salt and nutmeg. And pour in enough beer till it's like, coats the back of a spoon. And you dip sage leaves in that and fry them. And they are shockingly delicious.
And
you wouldn't think to fry a sage leaf, batter and fry it. But it's like the leaf gets really soft inside there, but it is stupidly good. And you don't really need a recipe because actually her recipe proportions were super weird anyway. But it's just flour with salt and nutmeg and I think like a pinch of sugar, and then just pour beer in until it's like the right consistency. Dip and fry. So good.
Wow.
I know.
That is a tip.
It is a tip.
It's
a really weird one, but we have
beer
done
battered sage leaves at the Merkel's house.
I know. It is very odd. And whoever's frying them is trying to bat everyone off from just eating them off. You cannot build up a stockpile because everyone's snitching
you'll have
them.
to give me some of your sage leaves if that's what you're about.
Right. All right. Sounds good.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Until
Have
next
fun.
time. Goodbye.
Bye.